Hey everybody. Um, Another live stream because I still can't record long videos on my computer because I keep running out of memory. So I do it live and hopefully you guys find these. I have no idea how the whole YouTube thing works. Um so a few things. First, I went down this YouTube rabbit hole and I have to admit I don't really watch as many of the sort of MBTI channels out there as I used to, and so I probably missed on a lot of the popular ones out there. But I just came across the Dear Kristen channel, and I'm assuming she's probably very popular in the community, and you probably get all of you guys probably know about her. But if you don't, check out her channel. It's called Miss Kristen. She does a bunch of MBTI related skits, and they're really good. They're really funny. They're really just kind of right on. She gets a lot of the nuances right with a lot of the types, and it also just goes to prove my theory, or at least my sort of point of the difficulty of trying to type famous people, especially if they're actors or actresses. Um, because my little theory is that they're all ESFPs, and they just are very good at acting like other types. And I think she is an ESFP, but she does such a good job of acting like all of the other personality types that it took me a while to kind of figure out what exactly she was. But at some point, she in one of her videos, she says she's an ESFP. So that's where I'm getting that from. Um, okay. So, anyways, I just wanted to share that because I've been watching the videos for the past day, and they just crack me up. They're really funny, especially her digs at the INFJ are really funny. Um, Okay. So speaking of INFJs, I've got another response to my polar testing video. Let me bring that up here. Um, so if you watch my sort of amateurish makeshift video on polar testing, um, go ahead and do those first if you're interested in doing them. But I put up a response video, um, and which was called Part Two, Polar Test Part Two. I'll put a link here. And I'm starting to get some responses from people who actually took the time to do it. So thank you for those of you who did. Um, and hopefully you got something out of it. And I got a new set of responses from somebody who I think he said he was an INFJ somewhere in here. I mean, does an INFJ ever leave a comment without saying they're an INFJ? Yeah, yeah. So he says he's an INFJ. And so hello, my INFJ brother. And so I just want to look at his response. I'm probably not going to go into as much detail like I did with the other commenter who was probably an INFP, but was sort of asking about it, or sort of wondering about it. So I sort of went through those because I was trying to help a little, with, helping them sort of, decide whether or not it was consistent with being an INFP. But here was just sort of general feedback. I don't get the sense that they're like trying to figure out their type. In fact, they seem pretty confident with it. So, but a couple of interesting things, especially for those of you who are INFJs out there, that I just wanted to riff on. Nothing really earth shattering or ground changing, but um, just things that stuck out to me. Okay, so the first thing was, one of the questions was one of these NE questions where it was really just trying to figure out, if you could come up with a story in your head and just sort of explore the metaphysical universe. And not only could you come up with a story, but can you come up with two stories or three stories or four stories that are completely unrelated to each other and, as divergent as possible? Basically, how much bandwidth or how much area can you explore in the metaphysical world? So this poster provided some answers. And again, the prompt was, imagine that there's, somebody moves into a new house and their dog refuses to go into one of the rooms. Give me an explanation or some sort of story of why the dog won't go into the room. And so one thing that they point out, and I think this is probably typical for people who don't have any on the front stack, and especially people who are any polar. Where when they're presented with one of these, like, just give me a story, just make up a story, right? I'll give you a prompt and you just run with it and, come up with a story. A lot of times when you see the testing videos on like talking with famous people or something, they will they act like there's like a correct answer, right? That they're given this prompt about some story or some characters and some event unrolling in a story, and they have free reign, right, to just say whatever comes to mind, right? Just make up a story. But I don't know if it's that they don't really understand the instructions, or they're just, or it really is just sort of this any polar thing where it's as if they're trying to search for whatever the right answer is, right? That there's like a correct way of finishing this story, right? Like, there's some clue hidden in there or something, and you're supposed to find the way that the story just naturally evolves and concludes. And then if they're sort of pushed on it, and then you can kind of see the light go on. Again, these are the people who are polar with any, they'll just sort of give you, kind of what you would expect, to see in like a TV show or a movie or something. Or they might actually look around, for some sort of sensory input to, sort of create a story based off of that sensory input, sort of like a unusual suspects type of thing, right? Like they're just they'll see a cup and then they'll just start talking about how the character was buying a cup and then they dropped it and it broke and everybody was sad and that's it, right? And they'll give you like two or three sentences and then just move on. And so that's what this polar test is trying to get at is, number one, can you just generate any story? And I would imagine everybody could. And number two, can you generate various stories that are divergent from each other? So they're in a totally different area of the metaphysical world. Um, and I would say if you're backstack NE, right? So even with, an INFJ where it's in our fifth slot, we can come up with different stories. And this poster, this responder did as well. But a couple of things. They're probably not going to be as like divergent um, in subject matter, right? They're going to be a little similar to each other. Um, and not only that, but the ones he gave are kind of like they're like realistic answers. They're like plausible responses. So like if you were trying to convince a cop or something, or you're trying to convince somebody, of the reality or some sort of plausible explanation for this dog. These are sort of realistic ones where somebody who's like dominant NE will just, my guess is that they would just come up with just the most outlandish explanations, right? Because they have free reign to just explore any sort of possibility, right? Like you don't have to be bounded by, some sort of plausible explanation or some sort of, realistic explanation. Um, and so this poster, you can read what he put, but his responses, are fine. But again, they're all sort of plausible, right? Like, they're not sort of, horror story or fantasy or sci-fi type explanations. They're kind of real world, grounded in reality type of explanations. And I would argue that that's probably the NI talking, right? Now, maybe a little bit of SI or something, but the difference between NI and NE is NI is a little bit more of a bounded um, intuition where it's trying to come up with some sort of universal truth or some sort of explanation of things, causal events or whatever. And, or at least that's one of the things that it's doing, is coming up with sort of explanations or causes, like how did we get here? And if you're a heavy NI user, you might be more likely to come up with more plausible answers, right? Like things that could actually happen or be a real reason in the real world, as opposed to somebody who's more of an NE user, like the other poster, because the other poster who commented, a week ago or so had sort of more sort of outlandish things like aliens or something, things that weren't like grounded in reality as much. So even though we like to think of, intuition and NI as being sort of this spacey, dreamy kind of function, and it can be to some extent, but NI would argue is, way more grounded, right? It really is trying to find an actual truthful, valid explanation of things. And so it's not going to just sort of go all out there, and explore all the, you know, different possibilities, including things that are unrealistic, like any is going to do. And so even though, it doesn't sound like they had any problem, generating answers, again, NI is up there in the fifth stack. So it's probably something that they could do all day, but you're going to see this more sort of bounded um, intuition or this bounded metaphysical response, right? That's more grounded in reality, which I thought was interesting. Um, he does go into sort of microchips and getting interference, that kind of thing, which might get a little sci-fi like, but it actually could technically happen in the real world. You see what I'm saying. Um, okay, and then probably as expected, if he's INFJ, he's going to be TE polar. So he really did not like the TE test about writing instructions on how to put together furniture. And this is, I mean, if you're not an INFJ or an ISFJ and you're not TE polar, it might be hard to understand how difficult these TE type tasks are. And I would say, especially for INFJs, ISFJs have a little bit more, they've got that SI part of them, so that they're a little bit better at sort of following rules and following instructions and understanding rules and understanding instructions. Where NI is just like, when we look at a bunch of pieces that are supposed to be making up a chair, like our mind just sees a chair, right? Like the platonic image of a chair. And the fact that it's broken up into 5 or 6 pieces in front of us just kind of makes our mind just bend, right? Like we just can't understand, like that's supposed to be a chair. Like you know, chairs have this sort of ideal form, right? And how are we supposed to put together the ideal form? And I can't tell you how many times I've gotten like IKEA furniture, some sort of furniture that you're supposed to assemble from home. And I will literally just stand there looking at all the pieces, just trying to put them together in my mind and see how they fit. Where other people are just like, well, just read the instructions, just follow the instructions. And I'm like, that doesn't make any sense to me. Like, and I will just try to put it together the way that I think it will work instead of following the instructions. Now, maybe that's just me, but it does seem like a very polar TE thing, where like even though there's instructions that are telling me exactly how to do it, my mind just refuses to accept it. And I just try to put it together the way I think it works. And like 9 times out of 10, I, put something in backwards or the wrong way, even if I'm following the instructions, right? And I used to think it was like a problem with like spatial orientation or something, but I don't think it's that. I think it really is just, TE. And so it sort of made me chuckle, his response regarding the TE test. Because yeah, he wanted nothing to do with that. The other TE test about, let's make the post office more efficient. Yeah, I mean, you could use some NE, maybe some NI, maybe some SI, to come up with some answers. But again, it's not so much can you come up with one or two, it's can you come up with four? Can you come up with five? Can you come up with six? And at what point does your brain just say, like, this is enough? I did my job and you're not going to get any more out of me. And it sort of looks like that's what happened with him on the TE tests, and it's what you would expect with an INFJ. So then he provided some response regarding the FI test. And again, like I said in my other response video, this is probably a bad FI question. If I had to do it all over again, I'd probably come up with a different question. However, I think his response was a little, does illustrate sort of the way you would expect FI to sort of manifest itself in an INFJ. So, for those of you who might not know, and I have another video on this somewhere on the channel, but it has to do with FI in the INFJ is in our what we would call the sixth slot or the demonstrative spot, and I think some people call it like the critical parent spot. But the way that I best describe FI or the sixth slot function, and in specifically FI in an INFJ, is I see it as sort of like the eye roll function, where you can do it, but you don't really put a whole lot of weight into it, or you don't value it that much, and you kind of disregard it, right? And you'll use it if you need it. Um, it's not like you're polar or anything, but you're so dependent on your tool function, and you're so like, you know, used to using your tool function, and the sixth function in a lot of ways is going to sort of contradict whatever your tool function is. And so, and again, with the INFJ, that's going to be FI. And so with FI type things, like we can do it, but we just don't really, we don't ignore it, but we disregard it. I always say disregard, like we just don't really give it a whole lot of value. And so that was sort of the sense that I got with his response. Is like, well, there might be some things about the kitchen I don't really like, but I don't really care. And so maybe in that respect, it was a good question, because it's not something that's like going to completely ruin your life if it's something you don't like. But if you're heavy FI, it probably grind your gears a little bit more if there's something you don't like in your kitchen than somebody where FI is in the sixth demonstrative slot, where they're just like, yeah, I don't really like it, but I'll live with it. Like, it's not really gonna, ruin my day or anything. And and also, we might just sort of deflect it to other people. And that was sort of his response, which I thought was interesting. Um, yeah, I guess I don't really personally feel that strongly about those things. Yeah, that's kind of a INFJ FI 6 slot type response. Um, okay, so let's see here. And then the SI one about the grocery store and just sort of recalling what items he bought. Sounds like he was okay at it. Maybe he had a little problem using it flexibly, and that's kind of what you would expect with SI being in the A slot. Trying to remember like what order you picked up the items out of the store. Um, I would argue you have to be able to use that function flexibly, and that could be hard. If SI is down there in the 8 slot. But it's there, it's strong enough to where he can remember most of the information. He's not like totally polar on it. FE and TI questions felt easy. Yeah, that's what you would expect. With the INFJ, they've got that. Obviously, the second function FE, that should be sort of no brainer for most of them. TI, of course, all of us INFJs like to pat ourselves on the back when we do well on TI questions, because that's our third function, and that's what we want everybody to recognize as being TI users. Okay, and then NI definitions, yeah. So coming up with definitions of sort of abstract concepts and trying to think of how other people would define those concepts. Kind of an NI, can you shift perspectives that seem to come along pretty easily to him. So yeah, I mean, all of this seems pretty consistent with an INFJ. And if you're an INFJ out there and you've taken the time to go through the test, I'd be interested to see what your responses are as well, or really any other type. Because, again, this could just be me reading into this, like I've got my framework, I got my framework, how I think the personalities work and how I think the functions work. And probably anybody could write anything and fool me into thinking, that I'm interpreting it correctly. But all that being said, it does seem pretty consistent. And I'm sure there's going to be some INTJ out there who's going to pose as an ENFP and try to throw me off my game. But I'll sniff you out, I promise. Okay, but anyways, I digress. If you are interested, in sharing your thoughts, please feel free. Positive or negative. I understand there's a lot of sort of things that could be worked on, problems with some of the questions. So I'd be interested in hearing that too, especially for those of you who kind of have different function order or are sort of in different quadrants on the functions. I'd like to see how you react to them. Okay, I'm probably going to do another video because there's something else I wanted to mention, but I'm gonna save it for another video. Okay, hope everybody has a good night, and I'll see you next time. All right, bye.